In 1860, Elizabeth Packard disagreed with her husband about religion. He had her committed to an asylum without a hearing. No evidence was presented and no medical evaluation was required. Under Illinois law, a husband's word was legally sufficient. That word alone could lock his wife away indefinitely. Elizabeth spent 3 years inside the Jacksonville Asylum in Illinois, 3 years locked away from her 6 children at home. When a jury finally heard her case, they deliberated 7 minutes. 7 minutes to reach a unanimous verdict that she was sane. She had always been sane, and everyone knew it. So Elizabeth went home to reclaim everything she had lost. What she found there should disturb you deeply. The night before her release, her husband had rented their house to strangers. He had sold her furniture. He had emptied her bank accounts. He had taken her money, her wardrobe, her notes, her children. Then he left the state. Elizabeth Packard stood in front of her own home with nothing. And when she tried to fight back through the courts, she discovered something worse than what her husband had done. She had no legal recourse. Under a legal doctrine called Coverture, nothing had ever belonged to her. Not the furniture, not the money, not even the children. Because the moment she married Theophilus Packard, her legal existence ceased to be her own. Everything she owned became his property. Every wage she might earn belonged to him. She could not sign a contract. She could not file a lawsuit. She could not write a will without his consent. And she could be committed to an asylum on his word alone, with no hearing and no right to challenge it. Elizabeth Packard's story is not an outlier. It is a case study in how the system was designed to work, and the paper trail that proves it still exists. Between the 22nd of October 1864 and the 12th of December 1889, the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane at Weston kept a logbook. It recorded every patient admitted and the reason for their commitment. A historian later compiled those entries into a pamphlet. It contains 125 recorded causes, 125 reasons you could be locked inside if someone with authority decided you belonged there. Read some of them. Laziness, novel reading, hard study, political excitement, religious enthusiasm, disappointed affection, jealousy, greediness, egotism, bad whiskey, snuff eating for 2 years, imaginary female trouble, menstrual deranged, domestic trouble. That last one is worth pausing on. The very first patient ever admitted to Weston was a housewife. Her recorded reason for commitment was domestic trouble. Think about what that phrase could mean in 1864. It could mean she argued with her husband. It could mean she was unhappy. It could mean she refused something. The vagueness was the feature, not the flaw, because the more reasons you have to lock someone away, the harder it becomes for anyone to prove they do not belong there. Now, the fair counterpoint. Fact-checkers have confirmed the list is real, while noting a nuance. These entries were recorded as supposed causes of insanity, not diagnoses themselves. The physicians of the time even expressed unease with the categories. So the standard explanation is that these were contributing factors, not standalone justifications. That explanation is technically correct and it misses the point, because the system did not require proof. In most states, a husband could walk into an asylum with his wife and have her committed on his testimony alone. No independent examination, no hearing before a judge, no lawyer standing between the person being locked away and the person doing the locking. The cause on the page was whatever the husband said it was. The record simply held the story in place after the decision had already been made. So the real question is not whether novel reading causes insanity. The real question is, who benefits when a woman who reads novels can be removed from her home and separated from her children? Who benefits when everything she might inherit is stripped away by a man who decides she is inconvenient? Once you see this mechanism clearly, the list stops looking absurd. It starts looking comprehensive, a net wide enough to catch anyone who needed catching. This is where the story gets darker, because the asylum was not only used against women. In 1851, a Louisiana physician named Samuel Cartwright delivered a paper to the Medical Association of Louisiana. In it, he identified what he called a new mental illness, drapetomania, the irrational desire of enslaved people to escape captivity. His prescribed treatment was whipping. For severe cases, he recommended amputating both big toes to make escape physically impossible. He also described dysesthesia ethiopica, a disease that supposedly caused laziness among enslaved people, cured by hard outdoor labor under white supervision. Northern publications mocked these claims, but the terms lingered in respectable print long after the laughter, as if the record mattered more than the reality. After the Civil War ended, the pattern did not stop. It accelerated. Fraudulent census claims were cited to argue that freedom itself was making Black Americans insane. When millions were suddenly free, institutions were waiting. In 1870, Virginia opened the Central Lunatic Asylum for the colored insane, the first such facility designated specifically for African American patients. Researchers later found no evidence that any patient ever voluntarily committed themselves. Doctors prescribed hard farm labor as treatment. Overcrowding and disease followed. The mechanism was the same. The population changed. The purpose did not. And then there is Canton. In 1898, Congress authorized the only federally funded mental institution for Native Americans in the United States. Opened in 1,902 inches, Canton, South Dakota. Over decades, hundreds of Native Americans from tribes across the country were forcibly committed. Reasons included refusing to conform to government policy, practicing traditional ceremonies, and being uncooperative with federal authorities. No interpreters. No real evaluations. Patients shackled to beds. Investigators described filth, neglect, and curable diseases turning deadly. Elders later testified that children at boarding schools were threatened with Canton as punishment. Everyone understood it was a sentence, not care. The building is gone now. A golf course sits where it stood, and a cemetery remains nearby. Even outside the most famous cases, the pattern shows its teeth in the quiet arithmetic of property. In court records from the late 19th century, you can find couples declared insane, and on the same page, an estate appraised and sold, children assigned guardians, a life disassembled into assets. Sometimes the notes are blunt. The husband is poor, but the wife holds land. Sometimes the justification is a single line, and the consequence is permanent. The lesson repeats. Once a label sticks, everything attached to you becomes movable. Once you were inside, the system could take more than your freedom. In 1927, the Supreme Court decided Buck v. Bell. Carrie Buck was 18 years old, classified as feeble-minded after becoming pregnant. She had been raped. Her foster family treated her pregnancy as proof of immorality and had her committed. Virginia selected her as a test case for its sterilization law. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the majority opinion and concluded with 5 words that still echo. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Carrie Buck was sterilized without meaningful consent. After 1927, forced sterilization expanded across the country, disproportionately targeting women, the poor, and the powerless. The logic of care became a tool of removal again, removal not from a home this time, but from a future. And in 1887, Nellie Bly proved something else. She feigned insanity and got herself committed to the women's asylum on Blackwell's Island to report from the inside. Once inside, she behaved normally, spoke normally, and the staff did not notice. The more sane she acted, the crazier they believed her to be. She found women committed by vindictive husbands and immigrants trapped by language barriers. Her reporting triggered investigations and reforms, but her sharpest point was about process. It was easy to enter and nearly impossible to leave. Pull back far enough, and the individual stories become a single mechanism. Coverture erasing a woman's legal existence. A logbook turning human conflict into a cause. Drapetomania turning the desire for freedom into a diagnosis. Canton turning indigenous spiritual practice into grounds for confinement. Buck v. Bell turning poverty and victimhood into justification for sterilization. These are not separate failures. They are the same system applied to different populations at different moments. The asylum was a tool for removing inconvenient people. The list was the justification. The beneficiaries were predictable. The husband who wanted property. The state that wanted land and labor. The institution that needed beds filled to justify its own funding. Every time, the question answers itself. Who benefits? Now, the uncomfortable part. The walls changed, but the pattern did not vanish. It migrated. If you want to see how removal can happen without transparent proof, you do not have to visit a 19th century asylum. You can open a social platform. Your digital existence is conditional. You do not own the space where your work appears, the audience you build, or the rules that decide whether you are in good standing. A single report can do it. A mass report campaign. An automated flag. A keyword stripped of context. There is often no hearing. Evidence is rarely shown. Appeals are frequently a form that leads to silence. Your reach collapses. Your archive disappears from search. Your income evaporates if your work is monetized. People assume guilt because the ban is visible, and the explanation is vague. We even have a modern list of causes, and it is as elastic as domestic trouble, spam, hate, harassment, misinformation, unsafe content. Words that sound precise, enforced at a scale that rewards vagueness. A post about abuse can be flagged as graphic. A survivor can be punished for describing what happened. A journalist documenting extremism can be treated as promoting it. An activist organizing can be labeled inauthentic. The category stretches to fit the target after the target has been chosen, and the paperwork reports, strikes, takedown notices, writes itself. And then come the unofficial institutions that circle the platforms like satellites, payment processors, app stores, domain registrars, employers who screen by search results, landlords who read rumor threads, schools that watch viral clips. A person can be removed from opportunity by a chain reaction of policies that each say, in effect, not our problem, until the combined effect is a locked door. It is not confinement in a building, but it can still be confinement in life. Modern removal also has modern weapons. Doxing turns a disagreement into a threat at your home. Deepfakes steal bodily autonomy without touching the body, making it impossible to prove what you did not do. Coordinated harassment makes speech voluntary only in the sense that silence becomes the safer option. Shadow bans cannot be proven, and that is the point. The inability to prove the harm is part of the harm. The vagueness protects the enforcer, not the enforced. You might say this comparison is unfair. A ban is not a prison. An algorithm is not a superintendent. That is true. But the architecture still rhymes. Removal without transparent proof. Rules written by the powerful. Appeal made difficult. Categories vague enough to be comprehensive. In both eras, authority moves faster than accountability, and that speed is useful to someone. Maybe I am connecting things that are not connected. Maybe the Weston list was merely clumsy record-keeping. Maybe Coverture was just a relic. Maybe Canton was just mismanagement. Maybe online moderation is only chaos at scale. But if that is true, then why does the pattern repeat with such unsettling precision? Why does every population that cannot fight back end up under the same kind of authority, losing the same kind of things? Your property, your children, your bodily autonomy, your name on a marker, your archive on a server you cannot enter? The list at Weston includes 125 reasons, but it only ever needed one. Someone with power decided you did not belong, and the paperwork wrote itself. There is always a story the institution tells about itself. The asylum called it treatment. The court called it public welfare. The superintendent called it human wreckage, as if the people were debris and the building was a dock. Platforms call it safety, integrity, trust. Sometimes those goals are real. Sometimes they are the mask. The problem is not that rules exist. The problem is that the rules can be enforced without the person ever seeing the accusation in full, without a meaningful chance to answer it, without an independent party who must justify the decision in plain language. And look at the incentives. A 19th century hospital needed patients to justify appropriations. Overcrowding became a sign of importance. A modern platform needs attention to justify valuation. Outrage becomes a metric of success. Both systems grow by feeding on conflict and then claim to be the solution to the conflict they amplified. Both systems prefer decisions that are fast, scalable, and legally insulated. Domestic trouble is fast. Policy violation is fast. Nuance is expensive. Due process is slow. The people most likely to be sacrificed for speed are the people least able to demand slowness. So when you see a list of 125 causes, do not ask whether each one is medically plausible. Ask what kind of power requires a list that long. Ask why vagueness keeps returning as a tool. Ask why the people labeled as problems are so often the people someone else needed to be quiet, to be gone, to be manageable. And if you think you are safe because you are normal, remember Elizabeth Packard. Remember Nellie Bly acting normal and being punished for it. Normal was never the shield. The shield was power. The ability to refuse the label, to hire the lawyer, to outlast the paperwork. If you cannot do those things, then you are one decision away from being treated as a category instead of a person. So keep asking the question the story demands. Not, is this category ridiculous? Not, does the policy claim to be about safety? But, who benefits when a system can take someone's life apart with a sentence, and no one has to prove anything first? The list only ever needed a pen, a checkbox, and someone willing to call that choice for your own good.